Hello there. So I like dice. Like a lot. Like a lot. Like maybe a concerning amount of a lot. I might have a problem. Anyway, in particular, I really like spinny dice. To me, they're just the perfect blend of fidget toy and random chance. I just have one really big problem with them. They're terrible to actually play games with. They spin forever, and half the time, once they finally do stop, they land between numbers or in some way where the outcome's ambiguous. But I have an idea of how to make one that's better. A spinner dice that spins freely at first, but then stops abruptly and always lands on a clear result. So let's make it. Okay, so my goal in this episode is to design a 3D printable spinner dice that incorporates magnets to index its rotation. I want it to spin freely and then stop abruptly on a non-ambiguous result every time. If you want to try printing it out for yourself, you can get the model for free on my things.com profile. The link to it's down in the description. I've also included a link to the exact magnets that I used, which are still the same magnets that we used in both the Fidget slider and Fidget dial in the last two episodes. So you can still buy one package of magnets to use for all of the models in this side quest. Our design approach is going to be very similar to the Fidget dial that we made in the last episode, so you're definitely going to want to go back and watch that video if you haven't already to get the full context of this project. Actually, each of the episodes in this side quest have been building on top of what we learned in the previous episode, all building up to this project. And this won't even be its final form. So get subscribed, stay firmly planted on the edge of your seat, and brace yourself for what's coming next. It's going to be clinically insane. Back on track. Okay, so just like the Fidget dial, the spinner dice is going to be printed in multiple parts. But unlike the Fidget dial, we're going to glue two of the parts together instead of just making everything a snap fit. Could I make them a snap fit? Yeah, probably. But this brings up a really important lesson that I've had to learn over the years. Don't make arbitrary or unnecessary restrictions for yourself just because it's the correct way to do it or because it's how you've always done it. Use the approach that actually works best for each given problem. Print and place mechanisms are cool, and sometimes they're the best approach. But sometimes it's better to just have separate parts that get assembled after printing. And snap fits are always nice so that you don't have to mess around with glue or other fasteners. But sometimes they just add extra complexity that's unnecessary and adds failure points in the design. The bottom line is that other than for the sake of doing like a specific design challenge or something, you should always just try to figure out what approach is going to solve the problem best with as little time, effort, and complexity as possible. Don't get me wrong, I love adding unnecessary cool stuff just for the sake of adding cool stuff, but the reality is that most of the time an unnecessary feature is just an opportunity for new bugs. I'm going to go through the design process for this model pretty quickly because most of the ideas in it are fairly simple and straightforward and are really just reusing things that we've done in the last few episodes. There are a couple unique tips though that I figured out along the way that I think could be really helpful to you in your Fusion 360 design process. While the design process was pretty simple, getting everything exactly right took ages. Just comparing the design session with the previous couple episodes, it's more than twice as long. The last couple design sessions have been around 5.5 hours or so, where this one had to be broken into two separate videos because in total it's just over 12.5 hours. A lot of that time was spent in tedious repetition creating all the variants of the number discs, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Since I knew that the spinner dice was going to be very similar to the Fidget dial that we made in the last episode, I started out by trying to work directly from that model and just modifying it to make the spinner dice. After fiddling around with it for a little while, I realized that it wasn't actually going to work well, so I decided to just switch over to making the new spinner dice from scratch. This is something else that I've had to learn over the years, being willing to just trust my gut and call it when the approach that I'm taking isn't working well. I really like being able to reuse work that I've already done to save myself time on a new project, but there gets to be a point where it ends up being more work than just starting from scratch. Knowing exactly when you've gone over that threshold is a judgment that just takes time and practice to develop. There have been lots of projects where I've wasted more time and effort than I'd like to admit just trying to force old components into a new project. I haven't always gotten it right, and neither will you, and that's okay. What's important is to learn from our mistakes and work to avoid them in the next project. Now, with multiple hours already wasted, I took a deep breath and opened a new model. I decided to start working from the center out, since the limiting factor in this design is the size of the magnets and the spacing between them around the number disk. I first created the D20 version since it'll have the most magnets and the numbers will be the most complicated to get aligned correctly. Actually, creating the numbers around the disk probably took more time than any other part of this entire model. Fusion has a tool specifically for creating text, which you can get to by hitting the S key to open the shortcuts panel, and then typing in the word text to get to the text creation tool. This tool can even be tied to a sketch path and allows the text to follow along your existing sketch lines, which is exactly what I did. I had it follow around the circumference of the disk. The main difficulty that I had was getting the numbers spaced correctly because they all needed to be spaced exactly equally so that they line up directly over each of the magnets. I really wanted to avoid manually placing each individual number so that I could easily just update the text in the future to create the other versions of the disk. So I had to use some creative problem solving to make it work. There were 3 things that I ended up having to do to get it to work correctly. First, I used the setting to space the text along the path. Then I had to add a special kind of non-breaking space character paired with each of the single-digit numbers. That way they would be treated as 2-digit numbers and would be spaced the same as the double-digit numbers. The last thing that I had to do was use a monospace font, which just means that every character is exactly the same width. This way, all of the numbers would take up exactly the same space. Actually, the last fiddly thing that I had to do was switch all of the zeros out for capital O's, since the monospace fonts that I chose had a slash through the 0 character. After I got the numbers mostly sorted out, I wanted to get it set up as a parametric feature. There's currently no built-in way to do this in Fusion 360, but someone's created this free plugin that allows you to do it. I put a link in the description to the plugin in case you're interested in trying it out for yourself. Even with the plugin, I wasn't out of the woods quite yet. I still had to figure out how to get a string of text into a parameter. I looked through all of the built-in parameter types in Fusion, but all of them only support numerical values, not strings. Reading through the documentation for the plugin, I found that you can use the comment field on a parameter, so that's what I ended up doing. I added all of the strings of numbers into the comment field of the respective parameters for each number disk, and then used that comment field as the parametric string for the text feature. It took me a while to figure out this workflow and get everything working how I wanted, but once I did, it made it incredibly easy to switch between strings of numbers. Once I had the number disk for the D20 variant how I wanted it, I continued working outwards, modeling the neural dial around the number disk. The number disk and neural dial are made to just slot together with an indexing tab to ensure that they always rotate in unison. I designed it this way so that the number disk can simply be popped out of the neural dial and replaced with the number disk for a different dice variant. This lets you reuse the case and neural dial for any of the versions of dice that you want, or to just swap them out on the fly. The most interesting design feature of this component is the center pivot that the dice rotates around. The center post of the neural dial has an opening for a magnet in the top and the bottom. These magnets will interface with magnets in the outer case. The neural dial is only held in by these magnets. There's no physical connection between the neural dial and the case. This lets you easily grab the edge of the neural dial and just pop it out to replace the number disk with a different variant. This also greatly reduces the friction when you try to spin the dice, since it's just the magnets holding it in place. With that out of the way, I moved on to creating the final component of the spinner dice, the outer case. Creating the case was pretty straightforward. My only real considerations were making sure that the magnets, as well as the number window, lined up properly with the number disk. I decided to split the case into 2 pieces so that each half could be printed face down on the build plate to give it a nice outer surface. To give a little more strength to the glued interface, and to make sure that they were easier to line up properly when gluing them together, I created a simple recess on one and a raised section on the other, following the curves of the case. Finishing the case wrapped up my main design of the spinner dice, but my work was far from over. As I said at the beginning of the video, the ideas in the design are pretty simple, but getting everything exactly right took forever. I created at least 4 or 5 more iterations of every single part, just slowly making tiny adjustments to the sizing and tolerances. Getting the magnets to press fit into the slots properly and getting the text to print cleanly and legibly took so many minuscule tweaks. Finally, after all these iterations, I had a spinner dice that met all of my initial criteria. It printed well, it spun freely, and it always stopped abruptly on a clear result. Now all I had to do was the most tedious and time-consuming part, creating all 14 variants of the number disk. This is where taking the time earlier to figure out and set up the ParametricText plugin really paid off. Yes, this process was tedious and took a long time because every time I had to wait for Fusion to reprocess the new text, but it was nothing compared to how long it would have taken if I had to manually update the text for every single version. Being able to just update the parameter that was being used by the ParametricText plugin saved me countless hours on this process. The reason that I made 14 versions is because I wanted to have a variant for each of the standard 7 RPG dice types: a D20, D12, D10, D8, D6, D4, and percentile. And for each of these 7 dice types, I wanted to have 2 versions, a turndown version and a standard version. The standard version of each dice has the numbers shuffled around the disc and spaced out in the same way that a normal dice would have them. This gives you the best chance of rolling fairly and not being able to influence the outcome. The turndown versions have all of the numbers in numerical order. This makes the dice less fair for rolling, but allows it to double as a numerical tracker that, for example, you could use to track your character's HP while playing D&D. For each of these 14 variants, I also made corresponding models for each of the numbers inlays. This lets you use a dual extruder printer or a multi-material printer to print the number disk in one color and the numbers in a different color. My brother has an X1 Carbon with an AMS, so he printed a couple number discs out for me and was even able to make the Nat 20 and Crit Fail their own unique colors. Did I test print all 14 number disk variants? Absolutely not. I'm relying on you to help me out with that, so if you decide to give printing them out a shot, make sure you upload pictures or videos to the model page on Things, and I'll show my favorite makes in a future short. I'm really happy with how this spinner dice turned out, but that doesn't mean I'm finished. I've already started working on 2 more evolutions of the spinner dice, so make sure you're subscribed if you want to see those episodes. Those will probably be the last couple episodes in this side quest for a while because I've already got a few other new side quests cooking that I'm pretty excited to share with you, so stay tuned if you want to see those as well. I've also uploaded a real-time assembly video for the spinner dice, which there's a link to in the description, so give that a watch if you want to see my tips and tricks for getting this thing put together effectively. I hope you'll try printing out the spinner dice for yourself and let me know what you think down in the comments. If you want to see the full, unedited, real-time process for designing this model, including me slowly losing and then regaining trust in Fusion 360, I've uploaded that as 2 different videos under design sessions, one for the main process and then one for creating all of the number disk variants. Links to those are in the description as well. If you liked the video, then like the video. If you didn't like the video, then dislike the video. Either way, tell me what you think down in the comments. If you want to see more videos about random stuff, then subscribe. You know how YouTube works. Stay Moxious.